Good morning. My name is Dallas. If we hadn't got a chance to meet, I am a pastor here at Doxology. Great to be with you this morning. I'm a pastor, but also I'm a DIYer. Is anybody else here a DIYer? Do you just committed to DIYing things in your life? I think part of it is that I am a Mexican man who doesn't speak Spanish, so I feel like I have to make up for it somehow. So I take apart everything in my home and try to fix it, my washer, my vacuum. So one time, this is a true story, one time in our house, we needed to replace the air vent above my stove. And I thought, how hard can that be? It's got to plug in, and that's it, a couple screws. So I take everything down, and I look at it all, and I say, okay, just be sure you cut off the power. That's it. That's all you got to do, and you can get everything else right. So I go up there, kind of check it. I go to the panel. You know, it's an old house. Nothing's labeled right. And I go ahead and I flip a couple switches off, but I didn't want to cut everything off because, I'm still watching TV as I'm going back and forth. So I cut off the right switches, so I thought. And I said, I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go fix this thing. So I go up there, I get everything ready, and I realized, the socket, the outlet, is in the wrong place. I got to move the outlet. Well, I don't know how much you DIY, but when it gets to electrical, things get very fishy. Electrical is a tough one. There are some people in this room that say, I don't touch that. If it comes to electrical, I'm going to hire somebody else. I wasn't at that stage yet in my life. I am now, but I wasn't. And I decided that I was going to go ahead and move this outlet. And so I thought I cut all the power off. I went up there. I grabbed the wires with my hand, mistake number 10, and I shocked the daylights out of myself, and I thought, something's going on in here. And I wasn't smart enough to know that I was shocking myself as this was happening. And so I get down there, and my body's all tingly, and I thought, man, if I do this every morning, I'll never have to drink any kind of energy drink ever again. Just do this every day. But I go back to the I go back to the panel, and I cut everything else off. I'm like, okay, surely this is it. I go back up there, I touch everything again, and I got shocked again. A second time, you would think this guy just cut off everything. And eventually, I had to cut off all of the power to my house in order to fix this outlet. It was one of those 60s or 50s houses where, it was connected to the dryer thing that was on the other side of the house, and I didn't know. That's kind of what happened. But this idea of DIYing, it's really, for me, you've heard the saying, if you want something done right, what do they say? Do it yourself, right? I just say if you want it done cheap, do it yourself. That's really more what I'm in the phrase of, because I don't always do it right. That's the truth. But DIYing is really about, what is the idea of DIY really about? It's about, I can do this, I don't really need help. Is that fair? I can do this, I don't need help. I can DIY and fix this dryer and this washer. Some of you do that, and that's amazing. But this is an idea for us that we kind of live in our life. It is that I don't really need help because I've got this. I've got this taken care of. And it doesn't matter if it requires a mastery electrician to do it. There's something in me that says, how hard can it be? How hard can it be? I can watch YouTube videos. Surely that's what they do. I can go to ChatGPT. That's what they do. That's not exactly the case. But there is this idea of really independence that's built inside of us that we really aim after. It's a culture that we celebrate. Don't we celebrate a culture of self-sufficiency? We say, hey, that's a person who's self-made. That's a person who rose, they picked themselves up by the bootstraps. They made it themselves. Independence is really a hallmark of our life. And so this morning, what I want to do is I want to answer a question that I feel helps us see dependence as something a little bit different. And the question we're going to answer is this. It's going to say, what if dependence isn't deficiency? What if it's the way we're meant to live every day? What if dependence isn't a deficiency? It's a way we're meant to live every day. Now, we're going to be in Exodus chapter 16. You can open your Bible there. Exodus chapter 16. If you don't have a Bible, we're going to put that on the screen for you. So up until this point, if you haven't been with us, we are in a series called the SuperNormal Life. Why the supernormal life? Because we want to see God do supernatural things in the everyday of our life. And really, this idea of independence we're going to talk about can really change the way that we see God and what we trust that He can do. So we're going to be in Exodus chapter 16. And to catch you up to speed, if you don't know this story, or if you haven't been here for a few weeks, the Israelites were in captivity by the Egyptians, and they crossed across the Red Sea, right? This is a very famous Bible story. Moses, Brian talked about, he puts a staff in the ground, and the Red Sea parts, and the Israelites walk across on dry land, and then the water crashes down, and the Egyptians and the army and everybody is swallowed up by that. So, right after that, do you know what happens? They go into the wilderness. And they go into the wilderness for a couple days, 3 days actually. And 3 days into the wilderness, they're like, we're thirsty. Come on, God, we're thirsty. And they start complaining to Moses, hey, we're thirsty. What are you going to do? And they get led to this little, basically like an oasis. And it has a bunch of palm trees. It has natural springs. It has everything that you can imagine. It's beautiful. And it's called Elim, E-L-I-M. And they're there for a couple days, and then God says, hey, it's time to move on. Well, where are they going to go? Where are they going to go from there? That's where this story is going to kind of pick up. So it's been about 30 days after they have walked across dry land. The Red Sea's been parted, an incredible miracle. It's been about 30 days, and that's where we're going to find ourselves here. So this is Exodus chapter 16, verses 1 through 3. They set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. On the 15th day, the second month, after they had departed from the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. For you have brought us into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So 1 month after they've seen one of the most incredible feats of power, parting the Red Sea, they're back in the wilderness and they're back in the desert, and the first thing they do is they say, I would have rather died as a slave in Egypt than been this hungry and this thirsty. So immediately what you see within them is you just see this idea that they don't trust Moses, they don't trust Aaron, but really it's kind of about a trust from God. They've watched him do some great stuff, and what we're going to look at this morning is we're going to talk about this idea of dependence, and I want to give you 3 kind of ideas of how God uses things like this in our life to build and create dependence on him. So the first thing we're going to see in this is we're going to see what we call the place of dependence. So it's kind of like what the Israelites had hoped was that this place, Elim, that they went to, that had fountains and rivers, and it was beautiful, and they could drink, and they could eat, and they could do everything. They thought they were going to go from slavery and captivity straight to that. That seems fair. They thought that they were going to go into an incredible place, and they would have no need and no want. What they didn't know is that that wasn't the destination. What was the destination for them? The destination was the desert. So in our life, what I want us to just for a moment consider and think about is this, that going into the desert is not a detour, it can be the destination. The desert that we can walk in our life is not always just, hey, I did something wrong. There's something that I didn't have enough faith. This thing didn't happen right. That the desert itself is meant to really build something within us. So you see that when they arrived to this place, they immediately realized in the desert of Sin that they were not going to have everything that they needed. They weren't going to have enough water. They may not have enough food. And they realized it very quickly. And what did they do about it? As soon as they realized they didn't have what they needed, what did they do? It says they grumbled, and then they complained. They said, hey, God, I would have rather died, and you didn't bring me to this place. I can think about in my life that there have been several times where I have been put into deserts against my will. I remember a phone call that I got that told me, hey, your dad has stage 4 cancer, we're not really sure what's going to happen, and we're just going to be praying about it. I didn't ask to be in that desert. I didn't ask to be in a desert that when my son was 1 month old, Jamie's holding on to him. He's 1 month old. I get called into an office and they say, hey, we can't afford your position anymore. You got a month left here. I didn't ask to be in that desert. There are things in our life that happen where we get placed into a desert and our immediate thought is, hey, God, you've made a mistake. God, what is happening here? I need water. I need food. But the desert is a place where God is going to show us something about dependency that Elim, the place with all the water and all the food, that it can't. And so what I'm propositioning this morning is that to start, in this idea of dependence, that the place of dependency begins in the desert. And that may not be something that you love to hear, and I understand that. But it is something that when we look at the way that God is going to use the Israelites and use Moses in the desert, we're going to realize and recognize that God's plan, God is always many steps ahead, and he always has a way that he's working out what's going to happen. And so I find that when I've been in those deserts, my tendency is I tend to create a life that's more independent of God than is more dependent on him. I'm a DIYer. Here's the truth. You can't DIY faith. And you're not meant to. And so they're in this desert, and here's what happens here. Moses, this is verse 4 through 6. Then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I am about to rain down bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, and whether or not they will walk in my law or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. And so Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, at evening you shall know that it is the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against the Lord. For what are we that you grumble against us? So the Lord speaks to Moses and Aaron, and he tells them, I'm going to bring down bread from heaven, and it's going to flow. And they go and they communicate this to the people, and they say, you're grumbling against us, but here's the truth. God brought us here. And so when you're complaining and you're grumbling, it's not against me. It's against the Lord who has brought us to this place. And what's really interesting about this story, so the translation I used here, it says, I'm about to rain down bread from heaven. If you look at your translation or your little story, right, it might say bread from heaven. Some might say manna. Some might say manna and quail, right? There's a different kind of thing. So this bread that fell from heaven is called manna. And I can describe it to you, but it's not worth it. It's just not great bread. That's what it is. But at that time, it would have been it would have been incredible food to them. And they know that this is going to rain down from heaven. And when it rains down from heaven and they see it, it's something they've never seen and they've never had. And they pick it up and they say, well, what is it? Right? And that is the name that stuck. So in Hebrew, the word manna means, what is it? You thought manna was like, oh, cool. It means bountiful bread. No, it means, what is it? Isn't that cool? Isn't that amazing that God would do that? And now we know it as manna. But it's this idea that they didn't know what they didn't know. But hey, God's going to provide us in some way, and he's going to rain down this bread from heaven. And then he starts to give some very specific instructions with it. He says, you're going to go out every day, and you are going to get a day's portion of manna. And then on the 6th day, you're going to get double portion. That's it. That's the rules he gave them. So it flows down. You go get a day's portion. You go. That's what happens. And what you find is exactly what you would expect. Some people say, okay, I'm going to listen to the rules. I'm going to go and I'm going to get some manna and I'm going to pick it up and that's what I'm going to have. And then other people think that it's toilet paper during an ice storm and they get as much as they possibly can. They think it's eggs and they rob a truck. They say, I need all the manna I can get, and they take it all for themselves. And you know what happens? All of that manna rots at the end of every single day. You know what doesn't rot? The daily portion. This is the second piece we're going to look at. It's called the promise of dependence. The practice. It's called the practice of dependence. So you notice that God didn't leave them high and dry. They didn't grumble and complain, and then God said, well, hey, too bad, you're in the desert. You are going to suffer here. You're going to be in this desert, and you're going to figure out a way to trust me. God hears their grumbling and complaining. Because you've grumbled and complained, I'm going to provide you with food. I'm going to give you something that will sustain you. But here's what's really important is he provides them with enough that it's bountiful, it's everywhere. But he asks them to take enough for every day. Just take enough for what you need today. See, the practice of dependence is that I can take the portion that God gives me today because I know he'll give me more tomorrow. I can take what I have right now and I don't have to hoard in bounty because I trust that what is there today will also be there tomorrow. When you woke up this morning, did you wake up and say, let me open the curtains and see if the sun came up? Let me double check and see that the grass is still there. There are things in our life that we just say, well, we know that it exists because we trust it. It always happens. It always takes place. I didn't go to bed and say, oh, I wonder if the moon is out. I wonder if the tides in the ocean are working right. There are things that we know in our life and we trust and we depend, and it's so out of sight that it's out of mind. I don't stand up here and say, okay, let me breathe in and let me breathe out. When I get anxious, I might. When I'm worried, I might. But for the most part, I don't have to live my life that way. This idea of dependence becomes so normal to us that it's almost like we don't even think about it anymore. But what's happened with the Israelites and where they are right now is they've seen incredible miracles happen in their life. And now they're in a desert, and now they say, everything that we've seen, God, we still don't believe that there's going to be enough. We still don't believe that you are going to come through. The desert is a place where we can practice our dependence on the Lord. So, when God tells them to go and just to get one portion of manna, he's not commanding them to do that. He's inviting them. He's inviting them to practice this dependence that they can have. Daily bread for us, it requires daily dependence. Daily bread requires daily dependence. And this is what I think when we look at this story, part of what we're learning is that God could have said, hey, I'm gonna rain down one little thing and it's gonna have your name on it. I'm gonna rain down this mason jar and it's gonna have manna in it. It says, Dallas, you go and you pick it up and you know that's how much you get. Why did he not choose to do that? Why did he say, I'm gonna just rain it down and manna's gonna be every single place? Because they have an opportunity to go and practice trust. Show me you're not gonna hoard. Show me that you are going to practice this idea of trusting me every single day, over and over. So dependence on God, and when we depend on God, it's not just believing that he can provide, it's believing that he can provide tomorrow too. So keep reading this with me. We go to Exodus 16 and we go to 22 to 24. It says, on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each. An omer is just a measurement. And when all the leaders of the congregation came to Moses, and they said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, and boil what you will boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till morning. So they laid it aside till morning, and as Moses commanded them, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. Thank goodness. So remember, they're taking bread every single day, and on the sixth day, they get to take double bread. That's a good day. Why are they taking double bread on the sixth day. Why did God allow that little kind of exemption? Because on the seventh day, the Sabbath day, there would be no bread. There wasn't going to be any bread. The story, if you read through a lot of the details, it says they went out to find more manna, and they didn't find any on the seventh day, because God specifically told them, you got to get double portion this day, because there's not going to be any on this day. And when I started to read this story, I thought, that's a very, it's a weird thing. Like, what does this have to do with the story? How does this fit into the lessons that God is trying to teach them? And that's when I kind of had this revelation, like, that God was trying to teach them dependence through a very interesting technique that is very foreign to us. It's called rest. Rest is a very foreign concept, especially in America, isn't it? We've got to work. We've got to grind. That's part of life. That's what you do. If you're not working 25 hours a day, what are you doing? And what I realize is in this story, God says, take double, because on the seventh day, you're going to get to rest. And you're not going to work. You're not going to do anything. Do you know what it means when you rest? When you rest, what it says is, I'm content here. I don't have to go out and work and strive. I'm good here. I can rest in this moment. There are sometimes I feel like I rest and I think about all the things that I'm not doing right now. But God is trying to teach them this idea that there is a promise of dependence. And that promise is that we can trust God that even on the days when it feels like he's absent, even when the days when he feels like there's no manna on the ground, well, we got a double portion. We can rest there. It's really an exercise in trust. And it's interesting that God built this in to this lesson that he was teaching them. He's teaching them this idea that rest can be a way that we show God that we trust him. Rest can be a way that we show God we can trust him. It's interesting that we talk a little bit about rest within the church, but it's not really an idea or a spiritual discipline that we really focus on, that we say to rest is just to wait and to sit with God and enjoy who he is. And that's what he gives them the opportunity to do. And so you see, he brought them to this desert. They grumble, they complain. He gives them manna. He also gives them some meat because, they had manna and they were like, well, what is this? I need protein too. I'm trying to get the gains. What is that? And he's like, I'll put some quail in there too. And then they get quail. But they consistently, they find ways to complain. They find ways to grumble. And God just continues to meet that need. And he gives them over and over again. If you remember early on, when he tells them that they're going to gather every single day, they're going to gather their daily bread, he tells them, it's a little phrase where he says, I'm going to test them. This is a test where God is saying, when you're in a desert, what is it that you are going to do next? What is it that what step are you going to take? Are you a grumbler? Are you a complainer? Will you look for a way out? Will you start to cry to God and say, God, you put me in the wrong place. This isn't a desert I'm supposed to be in. And we look at this story and we find this wasn't a punishment to them. This was really God beginning to work within them this idea of dependence. Independence is written into our Constitution as Americans, but it's also written into our heart. It is something that you and I always want to run after. When we lean one way, do we lean toward being dependent on the Lord and trusting what he does and what he's done? Or do we lean toward saying, I can DIY this. I've got this figured out. I think if I just, maybe if that person, if I could. And this is a moment where God just says, I'm laying it all out there, and let's see what you do next. But he calls them to this idea of rest. And so, when we begin to trust God and we begin to depend on God, what we're really doing is we're letting go of control. We're letting go of control of all the things in our life that we think we hold on to. The scariest thing for most people in their life is what? The unknown. The thing you don't know. What is the next thing coming in my life? I don't know. And that's exactly what the Israelites see. They look around and they say, I don't know what's next. Let me grab onto everything I can and let me fix this. And I think the story we see here and the lesson we see here is that God is saying, you can trust me. I have been faithful to you time and time again. I've been faithful to you from the beginning, and I will be faithful to the end. And he presents that in this opportunity through manna, through quail, and through rest. You know, one of the things that is unique that we don't talk about a ton is a life in ministry, like a life of working and living in ministry. And you know, as a pastor, like I worship where I also work. Have you ever thought about that? I worship where I also work, and the friendships that I create and the community that we build. There's also a component of like, hey, this is your calling. This is what God has called you to. And I think back to a place that I was working at, a church I was working at, where I had just built some really strong connections and some really strong community. And man, I thought just, this is the height of what we get to do. This is an incredible place. God's doing some incredible things. And over the course of a couple months, things just kind of started to shift in my heart, but also in the culture of where I was. And I was like, oh, we're going to go in this direction. We're going to do these things, and this is going to happen. And I get a text message. I remember, I don't think I have it anymore. We got a text message just say like, hey, can you come to the conference room really quick? That was not abnormal. That's like what we do every day. Hey, come to the conference room real quick. Okay, I come to the conference room. And there's like 5 people sitting around this table. And they put a packet in front of me and they say, hey man, sorry, this isn't a place for you anymore. So in an instant, the community we had built, the life we had built, the friendships we had built, is everything in that moment on top of financial security and health insurance and children and so like all of this stuff just, I see it like crumble in front of me. And I take it and I kind of look at it and I'm like, what am I supposed to do here? Like, what is this? And I in that moment, I entered into the desert. I was put into a desert where I didn't have a huge savings that I could just do whatever I wanted to. I didn't have that ready. I had to start thinking about, well, man, I'm friends with these people, but how will this feel? How will that be? All these things kind of came to my mind. And then I had to think, oh, my kids, they've developed friendships and relationships, and what is that? What is that going to look like? And I'm telling you, I began to walk in this desert, and I could have very easily in that season, and I almost did, truthfully, just say, you know what? Ministry is not for me anymore. Maybe I'm not made for this. Maybe I'm not cut out. Maybe this is God's way of saying, go do something else. You aren't made for this. Have you ever felt that way in a desert? Have you ever felt like you're in a place, it's something with your finances, it's your marriage, it's a relationship with an adult child, it's your kid at school who keeps getting in trouble, it's a spouse, it's a family member, it's your toxic parents, it's toxic grandparents. There's something that's a desert, and you're like, you know what, I'm just going to give up. Hey, I'm going to let this go, and I don't want to deal with it anymore. And I had that opportunity. And I remember the tons of conversations that Jamie and I began to have about what do we do next? And what does this look like? And I said, you know what? Maybe I'm not meant to be in ministry. I'll be okay. God will work something out. And I started to look at other things, and I started to look at, and maybe on the side I would say like, oh, here's a church I kind of like. Maybe I'll talk to them. Oh, here's a thing maybe I'll do that. And 3 months later, there was some prospects, but nothing felt amazing. And I was like, you know what? It's pretty clear. God's not going to open this door for me. So I'm just going to go ahead. I want to get out of this desert. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take a job over here. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. And it'll be done. And right about that time that I felt like, hey, I think I'm ready to be done with this, I met a bald-headed man named Brian Smith. And I began to have conversations with him, and I thought, oh, but surely this won't go anywhere. I don't know what God's going to do. Okay, this will be, hey, we're going to start this church, and it doesn't even exist yet, and it doesn't even have a place where we're going to meet yet, and we don't have somebody to do this, and we don't have that, and we don't have this, and we don't, not, sign me up. And what God began to do in that season was God began to show me His providence. And God began to show me the manna He was raining down. And if I would just take a little bit every single day, and I would just begin to trust, if I would begin to be dependent on Him, that He would begin to do things that I couldn't even imagine. What I didn't realize is that God, while my story felt like, while I was in a desert and all these things were happening in my life, what I didn't realize is that years and years before, a group of faithful people at Doxology had begun to say, what if we planted a new church? What if we made a new place? What if we rose up this leader? What if this happened? And all of these things started to happen over here, and I didn't know. And I'm over here wandering around in the wilderness saying, God doesn't have a way. God hasn't figured this out yet. At any point of that story, Doxology could have started a church 2 years before any of this happened. They could have had conversations a year before. They could have launched a position 5 months before. All those things could have happened. They didn't. Am I to believe that God didn't know that one day what He would align would put me on this stage? The reality is that there's a desert that you're in. There's a desert that you're in, and you're unsure of where it goes. And I want for you to, and I hope and pray that you can use this as an opportunity to say, hey, no matter what desert I'm in, I can trust that God will make a way. He will provide every single day. So when we look at the story, we see that the Israelites didn't just trust God one time. They didn't make a one-time decision and say, I'm going to trust. They made a decision to trust God every single day by getting manna, every single week by resting, and then every single year. Exodus 16:32, Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it, manna, be kept throughout your generations, so that you may see the bread of which I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. They kept a jar, one jar of manna. And every year they would look at it and they would say, I remember when I was in the desert and God brought me that. I remember when God showed up. I remember when I stood in front of my wife and I said, I can't do this. I'm not good enough. I remember that moment. And it was the Lord who said, I brought you out of that desert, and I have so much more that I can do. And it brought me to this place. And what will God do next? I want to trust Him. I want to depend on Him every single day. And so I know that there are some of you here that you feel like you're in a desert and you feel like you're in the wrong place, but God can use it to build trust and dependency in a way that you have never experienced it before. Maybe it's daily. Maybe you need to start your day with prayer instead of grabbing your phone. Amen. Maybe you need to read one chapter of the Bible instead of watching one more episode. Maybe you need to say, hey, God, I trust you as a provider more than I trust my paycheck. Maybe it's every week. Maybe you need to take a Sabbath day and you need to rest. There's been no rest in your life because you got to grind. You got to go. But rest tells God one thing: I trust you. You did it yesterday and you'll do it today. Maybe it's gathering together with people like this every single week to grow your faith and to fortify it. Maybe it's something every year. Maybe you have a manna jar. Maybe you have a jar where you just say, hey, what's a prayer that God has answered for me? What is something that God has done that I can celebrate? And you look at it, you put it in the jar, and you have this jar sitting there, and somebody says, what is that jar? That's the time. Let me tell you about that time that God made a way. There might be something in your life. My hope and my prayer today is that you can find something, whether it's daily or weekly or every year, that you can create this idea of dependence on God. What if what if dependence isn't a deficiency? What if it's how we're designed to live every day? We go from being independent to dependent on God and what He's done and who He is. Dependency isn't deficiency, it's a declaration. It is a declaration that God is faithful, He is enough. God will provide again and again. Will you do something this week that requires that? Let's pray. Father, you are holy and worthy, and thank you that we can trust you in the desert. Thank you that you give us opportunity to seek you and run after you every day and every week and every year. God, would we take that and own it? Father, in our life and in my life, I apologize where I have trusted myself too much. Earnestly, God, I need you. I need you to remind me that you make ways. You provide manna from heaven, overflowing. You provide water from a rock. You heal, you save, you restore. And God, this morning I declare that. And if there's somebody here that says, I haven't felt that in a long time, would today be that day? God, we need you. We desperately need you. Fill us up. It's in Jesus'